This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sirr.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show. And this morning at the breakfast table, we have not one, but actually two poets who are in to speak about their new collections just out. And I think we're going to be treated to hearing them read some of those poems. So we're looking forward to that, and I hope you enjoy it too.
The birds are busy, flitting and darting, enjoying the long day, boasting of nests. Under their feeder, fox slinks, hoping for dropped nuts. What I give him is never enough. While they sleep in feathered bunches, fox finds the outdoor larder I've forgotten to close in the back. He drags out a pack of biscuits, scoffs the pink slabs, and gulps down the paper. One day he found my glove and ate the leather finger.
And that was the poet Katie Donovan reading the fourth section of her poem Fox from her new and sixth collection May Swim, just published fittingly this May, gone by in 2024. So Katie was born and spent her childhood on a farm in County Wexford. She was educated at Trinity College Dublin and Berkeley College in California. She's worked as a journalist with the Irish Times and has been a creative writing tutor at IADT Dunleary and NUI Maynooth. Her first collection, Watermelon Man, a collection I remember well, was published 30 years ago, and Ivan Boland praised it for its distinguished and open language and its bold statements of identity. And these qualities indeed have never waned and remained consistent and strong in all of her subsequent collections. Entering the Mare, Day of the Dead, Rootling, New and Selected Poems, Off Duty, and now May Swim, a collection which we'll be chatting about today. So Katie, you're very welcome to Books for Breakfast.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, Peter and Enda. I'm a big fan of your podcast.
Oh, thanks very much, Katie. That's lovely to hear. And it's great to have you here at the breakfast table. Well, we both started publishing at the same time. And for me, you've always been integral to the poetry world I grew up in. So it's really great to celebrate your sixth collection with you today. And Peter and I thought we'd keep Katie company today with another poet at the breakfast table. So we're going from Dalkey by the Sea, where Katie lives, and we're moving up north to Derry and to the poet Mícheál McCann, whose first collection, Devotion, has just been published this year and in May, this time by Gallery Press. Actually, I note, Mícheál, that your book came out on the 17th of May, which is also our daughter Freya's birthday. So it's a very good day indeed. So Mícheál is a really vibrant presence on the current poetry scene. He's been the recent editor of Poetry Orange Review, and his poems have been published widely in the Poetry Review, Poetry Ireland Review, Banshee. His work has been anthologised in Queering the Green and Romance Options, Daedalus Press 2023. Mícheál holds a PhD from the Seamus Heaney Centre, where he's the 2024 Publishing Fellow. So Mícheál, you're also very welcome.
It's great to be here. I'm delighted.
You're both very different poets, and yet there's a few kind of similarities, theme-wise in the books. I mean, Mícheál, your poem Swimming Off Snave Pier is a great companion piece to Katie's May Swim poem. Both very cold experiences. Katie speaks of the pain of the water's freezing touch in White Rock Beach in Killiney, while you, Mícheál, you describe the chill so awful my stomach distends like a big beach stone. And animals, both of you seem to love animals. There's lots of cats and kittens in the two collections. Bumblebees in yours. Katie, a sardonic poem on animal homosexuality in your book, Mícheál. And I was wondering, how important is that kind of world of animals and nature? I mean, is it a kind of inspiration for you both? Mícheál, I wonder, do you want to start with that?
Any sort of perspective that's not human sort of reorients our perspective on our own emotional issues, I think there's a sort of central grief at the core of my book, and whenever you occupy the perspective of my cat who's looking at me being very sad on my sofa, it reorients things in a sort of an ungenerous, cruel way sometimes, but it's useful, I just love the way animals move through the world, and it's so different to us, and we're so abstracted and stuff, so I just find it very generative in writing and thinking about writing, I think the American academic Lucy McDermott said that the most written on subjects in Irish poetry were 1, holy wells, and 2, cats. So there you go.
That's interesting because I was actually emailing Lucy this morning and she was saying her new book is coming out with a cat on the cover. It's a book she's doing about Irish poetry, I think, from the 1990s. So that's a good connection. But Katie, nature, it's obviously something very close to you too. It's all go at the bee hospital. Ever since April, my daughter and I have tended the casualties. You tell us in the poem Midsummer Rescue. There's violet, bluebell, wallflower, dandelion fern in your poem The Verge. There's a profusion of plants and flowers in your gardens throughout the book. And I wondered, was there really a bee hospital? What a brilliant idea. But also, let's talk about that fox, because we heard you read an excerpt from your longer poem, Fox, just earlier on. Could you tell us some more about that fox and the adventures you had? I particularly found the bit when he entered your house and he caused such chaos. I found that really an arresting moment in that poem. But you nurtured that fox, didn't you, Katie, for quite a long time?
Yes, I did. And apologies for sending you that that email saying, oh, I noticed you spotted a fox too. And this is what you need to do, because I know you're a fox, although he gave you a fabulous poem, which is coming out in your next book, disappeared. Whereas my fella appeared, it was a very cold March day. It was coming into dusk and I was doing a few bits out in the garden. And because I live close to Killiney Hill, there's still some sort of wilderness areas. And some of my neighbours have really huge gardens with a lot of cover. So there is more wildlife. Like I have spotted hedgehogs and badgers as well. There's more of a sort of corridor for them than there would be kind of in closer to the centre of the city. But this fella showed no fear. Normally foxes are scared of humans for good reason, because, you know, some of us love them, but a lot of people think of them as vermin. And that is also a sign, because I did my research afterwards, that they're close to death. You know, the survival instinct is just ebbing away. And I did notice he had very bad mange. So I ended up sending away to Fox Trust, which is a charity in the UK for homeopathic drops, because he kept turning up and I'd given bits of food. And I thought, I rang some wildlife rescue places and they said, well, you'll have to trap him. We'll come and get him and rehab him, but you'll have to trap him. And I even, from Kildare Wildlife Rescue, they gave me this trap. It was a rusty old thing and the fox wouldn't go in there. So I had no choice, and I had to do my own thing, which was to keep him in his own habitat, which they say is better, and feed him every evening with the drops in there. And I mean, I'd be hesitant to endorse homeopathy. I've tried it myself with varying results, but there's no kind of placebo effect when it comes to foxes. And it did result in, after 3 months, his coat growing back. And as you say, I had a guest one evening who left in a hurry and left the door open, and he did come in. I guess he was wondering, well, where's my evening feed? And that's where it usually comes from. And he'd kind of established a routine where our garden was his territory. But there was that very uneasy feeling when I came home and saw the door open, of that boundary, that threshold being crossed. And although I had gotten to know him so well because I saw him every day, to see him in the house was very strange. And subsequently I saw this French movie, I think it was, about a girl and a fox. And the fox comes into the house. I think she forces the fox into the house and the fox just has to get out. Whereas my lad was kind of looking kind of cozy, but there was no way that he could become an indoor animal. He was wild. And also we had a pet rabbit at the time and cats. And but it was just one of those moments that was very bizarre. You know, Mícheál was talking about how when we see things from the point of view of an animal, we have this huge and wonderfully refreshing perspective. And that was one such moment. And before I stop talking now, I want to say, Mícheál, I was reading your beautiful poem about the pipistrelle bats last night. And I hope one day I'll be lucky enough to write such a poem about bats, because they're wonderful creatures.
From foxes and bats back to cats, because Mícheál, it's evident from your book how much you love cats, and literary cats too. I'm thinking about, like cats reworked from the Irish tradition. I'm thinking of the famous, or the poem Poet and Cat, which is dedicated to Leontia Flynn, and it's a version of the famous 9th century Irish poem Pangar Bun. I always remember Frank O'Connor's translation in Kings, Lords and Commons, where he ends, master of the death of mice, he keeps in daily practice. I too, making dark things clear, am of my trade a master. And so your version ends, prayerful practice made this feline a virtuoso, my thoughts sharp as this scratch, together we peer from the window. So kind of a very kind of playful variation, very different poems in the end. And I know you look to the original Irish of this poem in books like Early Irish Lyrics by Gerard Murphy. And I was wondering, do you have a special affinity for those early Irish poems? Do they have a particular resonance for you?
That's such a great question. I think my first foray into poetry that spoke to me as a gay person was stuff in like the 80s and the 90s. It was like the AIDS crisis, right? And that's a really interesting effect, right? So when you within 50 years, that's the span of your literary tradition, Beyond that, there was no sort of explicit work. So I think I was inspired by the way Leontia, who that poem's dedicated to, turns back to Catullus, with a certain like irreverence, but incredible reverence in the same step, as like something that can be really generative, even though like obviously Catullus wouldn't speak to being a contemporary woman in Belfast, and yet she somehow makes it that. So I think she sort of inspired me with a sort of note of unscholarliness to go back to ancient Irish lyrics that like would have no vocabulary for the kind of person I am or the kind of society we live in, and I thought it pushed me into that even more, that like, and I suppose I do feel quite monkish with my cat and at that point, that apartment we lived in. So it's a nice way of quietly affirming the type of writer you are and the type of person you are,
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that reference to Catullus. I mean, Catullus is such a kind of complete fascination. Still, I'm kind of obsessed with Catullus as well. But that kind of search for models I find very interesting. I mean, and indeed, because Irish language, obviously in the form of Cuina Artileira, plays a very big part in this book, and we will come back to that. But before that, I was going to ask you maybe to read one of my favourite poems in the collection, Why the Cat Means What It Does. It's from the title sequence, Devotion. And it's like a kind of, it reminds me, it's a kind of that Christopher Smart poem for my cat, Jeffrey. It's kind of resonant, that for me. It's kind of the incantatory kind of style of it. So can you tell us, maybe tell us a bit about that poem and then maybe read it for us?
Well, you're absolutely right. It was sort of, obviously any poem that's about a cat has to be in response to that, for I will consider my cat, Joffrey poem. And there's the Mary Oliver poem about her dog. And then Martina Evans is this wonderful poem. It's not in her selected, but I think it was in her first book, or was it in Can Dentists Be Trusted? I'm not sure anyway, but it's not collected anyway. And it's called For I Will Consider My Cat, Eileen Murphy. And Martina Evans is just such a model to me for not only how to be a poet, but to just lay your attention on what you find interesting. And I just find her, she's been very important to me. So I wrote this poem, but I didn't want to lean into the For I Will, because it's sort of a tempting fate, 3 really extraordinary poems. So I changed my anaphora to Because. And this was only when I had one cat. Why the Cat Means What It Does, for Martina Evans. Because he is the one thing I don't have to justify myself to. Because he wets his paws to clean his forehead with such care, I'm reminded of the pleasures of duty. Because he shows kindness to me and is shrewd with strangers. Because the evening I drove to get him off the Shankill, the night was black and unforgiving, and he rose from a puddle of his siblings to grant me an audience. Because electing to love something you don't have to means something. Because I refuse to bend to the Christian neighbour's conception of a meaningful life. Because he hissed at her. Because another neighbour assumed we were brothers who shared a cat. Because people think he is just a cat and neglect to consider how a gold band is anything but a symbol and are wrong. Because when the front door opens, he peels his paw in the jam to pry the door open quicker, as though he were a monk in pursuit of a long-awaited word that made him think, how good to find a new word for love. Because the room was full of music only I liked, and he brushed his cheeks on the legs of my chair and sat with me a while. Because he lies beside me and guides my eyes to the window. Because if it is well with his soul, it should be with mine. Because around 11 every morning, when I am drowsy and unhappy, he meows quietly and lies on the floral bedspread. Because I so rarely hear, I need you, I need you.
That's really lovely, Mícheál. Thank you. I really love the bit of the cat trying to prise open the door, looking for a new word for love. And then that word love, it made me think of the two of you. And you're actually both very tender love poets in your collections. Katie, you have really great celebratory poems of love to your children. The poem Sizing Up for your son Felix, where you wish for only good things for him. And you say that love will come for you and fold you in her arms when I no longer can. It's a beautiful line. Or there's a poem of love for your friend, who I remember at your launch, Catherine Harris, and you're describing the two of you dancing away in the Royal Marine Hotel. I remember that hotel well from my youth too. And you say lemon-washed eyelids, spangled blue. But central to this book are aching love poems as well, of memory and loss, and a celebration of the life of your husband who died. And I'm thinking of poems, Katie, like Beaming and Snowman. But you kind of come in slant on this topic of love in the next poem, Archaeology, which involves a very small but important object. And I'd really love if you read this poem and if you introduced it for us now.
So this is another garden poem. You'd think I was a brilliant gardener, but actually I let my garden do its own thing a lot of the time, thinking, yes, it's a wildlife corridor, and then I enjoy the surprises. But I have made an effort to create 2 compost bins. One is not in use at the moment because some bumblebees have taken it over and made a nest of it. But every so often I go seeking compost. And this one day I discovered something quite unexpected, which I think a lot of people find, a piece of cutlery in their compost that just sort of got flung out with all the potato peels. And again, it was a catalyst for a memory, at that point, a kind of a far off memory, because it was of my children when they were little and their dad spoon feeding them, getting covered in goo. He was a professional cellist and hated his fingers getting sticky for obvious reasons. But also, interestingly, and I couldn't weave this into the poem, but it's there, I suppose, in the title. He did study archaeology. He was very torn between going the path of history and archaeology and becoming a professional musician. So, archaeology. In the dank air of November, I take a figary to go harvesting. Time to repot the grape hyacinth, so it's ready for spring. I squat with my trowel, reaching in for the rich loam at the bottom of the compost bin, wondering how long the apple and potato peel have been settling. I glimpse a flash of silver and sky blue, dig out a worn spoon. I recall him swooping to feed small gooey mouths, opening like birds, until they learned to clutch the handle. Teenagers now, they don't recall much of their father, and when I brandish in triumph this souvenir of high-chair meals shared together, they shrug. I return to the garden and my laden bucket, spreading the compost, observed by hopeful robins. The spoon sits alone on the empty table, a small, clean memory sprung from the midden.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Mícheál, there are many, to me, extraordinary poems that come out of the experience of being gay in Northern Ireland. And, you know, there's that Darren Bradshaw's Last Drink, which is an extraordinary poem about the murder of a young gay RUC man in a pub in Belfast. And also at the centre, at the very kind of the core of the book, is Keen for A, which echoes Cuinú Arti Lera, the heartbreaking 18th century poem by Eileen Dove Hunnell. But you reimagine it in a contemporary Belfast where a young man mourns the death of his male lover who's been murdered. And it's a visceral kind of heartbreaking sequence of poems in 21 parts with the Cuinú present throughout it. And, you know, Mohrá Godangantu. Now, there have been lots of versions of Cuinú Arti Lera. I mean, I'm thinking of just Paddy Bush did a great translation, John Fitzgerald, Mona O'Rourke, Pádraig Ferter. Doireann Ní Ghríofa's book, A Ghost of My Throat, was inspired by it, and in fact includes a translation by her in it at the end. But this is what you've done is very different, obviously, because you've used the Cuinú as a kind of framework for, you know, a very modern, very different kind of elegy. But I wonder what drew you to the Cuinú as a frame for that, and to set it then in a modern day kind of Belfast.
So my family undergone a really tragic death just prior to COVID, and I was sort of foraying around, as we do in books, to try and find something sort of adequate to that, and I couldn't really find anything. And just in my stumbling about, I came across Doireann Ní Ghríofa's book, A Ghost in the Throat. And then I was sort of so fascinated by her work in that book that then I came across Mona O'Rourke's, which is, I mean, all the versions you've described, Eilish Dillon's as well, I think is extraordinary. But it was Vona's that the first line, Mogwal Godangan, who is just husband, which I just thought was so, as I say, same with Leancha, I was really like pierced by, I'm very precocious child, I want to play by the rules and stuff. So when I see these poets who bend them to their own means, I found that quite thrilling. Anyway, so I started to read a lot about the Keen, and I suppose the grief I was feeling started to manifest through aspects of that. But then I also was struck by Eileen Dove McConnell's love for her partner. So what sort of happened was this very organic, and in some ways a sort of a writing process that defied me quite a lot, where I was sort of writing this swirling love poem and also this anticipatory poem about loss of that love, and at the core of that 18th century poem, it's a story of persecution. He was killed because he was a Catholic, and I guess I didn't find it a massive imaginative stretch to lift that, where just a few pages prior, there's a man killed because he's gay, arguably because he's a policeman, but I don't know. I mean, the paramilitaries who killed him said he was an easy target because he was gay, So I don't think there's massive imaginative leaps to be made there. But it was an exciting writing process anyway.
Yeah, it was really inventive, I think, to do that and to reimagine it, as Peter said, and set it in modern day Belfast. And also, Derrynane, it's a place where it's very close to our heart. We go there every summer, Peter and I, actually. And I always think of Eileen Dove McConnell when I'm out walking the beach there. There's a place actually in Doireann's book where she does go back to Derrynane as well. But anyway, I love the way it was really the core of the book, and I thought it was really powerful. And another poem that actually grabbed my attention is Haircut with Beard Trimmer, where you, Mícheál, become a kind of brutal haircutter to a loved one. It's a poem of great energy, and it ends up on a real high. I think bright moments of wakening, you say, which I really liked. And Peter and I are wondering, would you read that for us as well, Mícheál?
Certainly. Katie, I loved so many love poems in that book, but what Peter was saying as well, I'm drawn to stroke that we're used to now, and I love that sizing up poem, Katie, so I love a genteel love poem as well. So I'll just read one. This is beside, by the way, the poem, Peter, you mentioned about the police officer, because I suppose I wanted to put these poems side by side because, this is a very intimate love poem, what someone was denied, A haircut with beard trimmer. By halves, I do not do things. So this windowless bathroom becomes a musky, masculine-smelling salon. Tiles rolled, toilet rolls stowed, a starling blue face cloth draped over the thin radiator warmly to sculpt around your neck. You reverse cowboy the toilet seat, and I set to work, an untrained brutalist, gently hacking on subtle gaps in a burgeoning scalp, where blue veins like curious dolphins threaten to approach the surface. I am the assistant playing games as the tired master eats some lunch, and yet to hold a head heavy with duty, whose curls tighten with weariness. The fuzzy loops of you fall to the tiles like duck tears or rain against a window, muted, as all things are, in those first few bright moments of awakening.
You're a true love poet, Mícheál, I think, aren't you? True romantic.
Really? I think so. I think I've said somewhere before, but I was really struck that Michael Longley said somewhere that all poems are a kind of elegy, and I think there's a very the direct opposite of that is every poem's a love poem, isn't it? I think it's just a question of how you look at things,
You can always go to Michael Longley for a good quote, can't you?
Yeah.
He defines everything well.
To you, Katie, in the title poem of your collection, May Swim, I mean, I know in COVID we were only supposed to go in a 2K kind of radius from our homes, and you were lucky enough to be able to get swims in White Rock Beach, where you live, close to where you live, out by Killiney. So that must have been great. But can you read that poem for us now?
I will, Peter. Thank you. Yeah, we were only allowed to go 2 kilometres from our homes, and it was gorgeous weather. And I do start swimming in May, although it can be a painful experience to get used to the temperature of the water. And I'm not one of these hardy all year round swimmers. So, it's now late September and I'm beginning to get cowardly again. But while it lasts, swimming in the sea, I've always found incredibly sustaining. Hence the sort of several meanings that underlie the title. May Swim, White Rock, 2020. I wade in, my hands wringing from the pain of the water's freezing touch, its greed, to suck the warmth from my toasted skin. After immersion, every cell tingles, glowing and replete. I peel off wet togs and dress, the clench of fear released. I'm a sea pink, blooming in the rocks.
Well done, Katie. It's a great title poem. That's Katie Donovan reading the title poem of her new collection, May Swim. So we began listening to Katie read a poem from that collection. And now we're going to end this conversation by having Mícheál McCann read a poem. He's going to read one he's chosen called Walking Through Empty Houses. And again, I love this poem for the joyful ending. I think I always want to end poems on a total up, Mícheál. This poem really cheered me up. And I'm glad you can read it for us tonight because it does start off on quite a grim journey, but it leads us to somewhere that we didn't expect. So if you want to just tell us a bit about it now and maybe read it for us, we'd love to hear it. Thank you, Mícheál.
This poem is about that procedure that a lot of my generation are doing at the minute, where you have to go through these agonizing walks through these, less than adequate houses, and it was a period of about, I think a year and a half where me and my partner just walked through these houses, and, they would say, oh, this is brilliant, isn't it? No, the chimney brace isn't, braced properly, but that's fine. Things like this, and I think at the core of that, and so many people just deserve, a perimeter that they can, paint the walls of and feel safe inside. And, so this poem is really a dramatization of basically me wanting my own privacy and perimeter with someone else. Walking through empty houses. Receiving the customary chill passing Paisley's church, a theological spank on the bottom, we are soon greeted as two brothers by the Gile-wound estate agent. He struggles to turn his BMW, cobalt and sleek, in the tiny cul-de-sac. A rider, is it? BMW asks if you are proud, and I wonder, does he refer to our mother? Somewhere in Ballysillan seems promising, then 3 articles on spool of Catholic families prevented from moving in, not to west, not to east. For the first time, I wished my namesake away. Packs of miserable people, a kettle of vultures awaiting Susie, the estate agent, to disembark her Micra. Poor Susie, friendly but without enough hunks of meat for all the jet black jackals with our red eyes. She unlocks the bright pink door, perfect for poofs, I say. You frown, and desperate people abandon small cars and umbrellas. We speak quietly as we step through a small terraced house, as though on consecrated ground where we don't belong. Having endured the last "what's for you" well-wish, I go catatonic in Boy Park. Simple are my requests. To cook eggs well on a stove I inherit while looking out to a yard painted mint green, pebbles in terracotta pots, from which nasturtiums erupt and crawl the walls. To lie in bed and watch a stippled ceiling, sounds of kids tumbling up and down the stairs next door, rather than paramilitaries kicking the other men out of the house next door, for the lock to be strong, the windows to be open, a front door to be painted a lively colour, to be undisturbed with my cat on a cheap upright, for those squares of sun on the rug to be mine.
Great stuff. I love that.
I think we're all just still thinking of that. It's a very visual poem, Mícheál. Thanks for that.
The nightmare of estate agents.
How awful. And I just want to say as well, thank you so much to Mícheál and Katie for coming in today. It's great to hear your voices, and it's great to find connections as well between your work. But I think we're going to move on now to the Toaster Challenge, will we, Peter, for a bit of crack?
Yeah, the excitement of the Toaster.
We need excitement.
The excitement of the Toaster Challenge, where our guests get to talk about a book that they love or that's resonated with them in some way for around about 3 minutes or so, as long as it takes to make a not too charred, but a kind of a well done slice of toast, I suppose.
Yeah, so no pressure at all. And I know that Mícheál and Katie have chosen a poem each for the Toaster Challenge, so we're going to have a Toaster Poem Challenge. So we'll begin first of all with Mícheál, who's going to talk about Louise Glick's poem Sunset from her collection The Wild Iris, that some of you might know. So Peter is going to get the bread now, and he's putting the bread into the toaster.
Into the very expensive toaster. It's The bread is going down right now. 1, 2, 3, and off you go, Mícheál.
Beads of sweat. This poem is from a book. It's one of those books that I think really set me on a journey and opened me up to what poetry can do. It's called The Wild Iris by Louise Glick. In it, simply put, she occupies the voices of all these small flowers. There's, like wild scilla, and there's everything, and there's these tiny little flowers that look up at humans, be they gardeners or passers-by in forests or whatever. And it sort of creates a godly effect. She has this sort of Old Testament voice, but it sort of inverts the theological idea of, the huge God, small person. Then you've got this incredible voice encased in a very small thing, pitying or being furious with the people. I might read the poem and then maybe I might make a bit more sense. But this is one of the flowers speaking towards the end of the book, and the poem's called Sunset. My great happiness is the sound your voice makes, calling to me even in despair. My sorrow that I cannot answer you in speech you accept as mine. You have no faith in your own language, so you invest authority in signs you cannot read with any accuracy. And yet your voice reaches me always, and I answer constantly, my anger passing as winter passes. My tenderness should be apparent to you in the breeze of the summer evening and in the words that become your own response. You can tell when I really like a poem because I can't stop smiling when I'm reading it. There's so many poems in this book that do this, but it's what we were talking about earlier, about what animals do to our own sort of human issues. What she's doing here is, there's another poem earlier in the book where she's getting really cross at these people who've broken up in her garden. You call this despair, and that the punishment is really the fact that this is all here and it all has to go. It's incredibly theological, and also in that really American way, it's really liberated. It's not very formalized. It's just a wonderful book, and I think she's just endlessly inventive. And yeah, I think this really gave me an opening into what voice can be in poems. I have so much fun with the start of a poem. I wonder how you feel, Katie, but the start of a poem is always the most exciting because I'm not really sure how it's going to sound yet. And books like this have given me that sort of lesson. Oh, I worry the toast hasn't popped yet, but
that's a great description of that poem.
And I love that idea of the voice as well, because it is true, she had a very unique voice, didn't she, Mícheál? And that idea that she can be authentic in a poem and be yourself, and you can hear that voice coming through is brilliant. And Katie, we're moving on to you now. So Mícheál, I always love when people talk about why they love something, and it actually always sends us back, doesn't it, Peter, to reading the work again. So Katie has chosen a poem by Pascal Petit called Jaguar Girl, and it's from her collection Mama Amazonica, isn't that right, Katie? So you're going to tell us about that. So again, Peter, are you ready with the bread?
I am ready with the bread. I'm putting it in now, pressing down the button and setting it to kind of medium well done. And here we go, Katie. 1, 2, 3.
So I chose Jaguar Girl. It was very hard to choose one poem from this book because I love all the poems in it. It does that incredible sort of metaphorical act that I wish I could do, where in the space of an entire book, there is this rainforest full of creatures and plants. She mentions, I think, over 50 creatures. I didn't even count the plants. So you feel like you're there. She has visited the Amazon many times. I doubt I ever will get there, but because I've read this book now, I feel I sort of almost got there imaginatively. But it's not just about that ferocity and excitement of the wildness of the jungle. It's also about her mother, who suffered from a mental illness and was abused by her father, and her journey towards making peace with what her mother was. Her mother ended up in a mental institution. And Andy, you said earlier about how my poems are full of creatures. So, of course, I'm going to be drawn to a book like this, but also to the possibility of what it can say about a family, about loss, about dislocation. It made me think actually of Nuala Ní Dhomhnall's The 50-Minute Mermaid, or indeed more recently, Victoria Kennefic's Eggshell. Both books I admire a great deal as well. But I'll read the poem because I'm conscious, quite a long poem, and I don't want burnt toast for breakfast. Thank you. And it is interesting, actually, that Petit, who is of Welsh, Indian, and French heritage, started life as a sculptor and thinks of her poems as installations. Jaguar Girl. Her gaze is tipped with curare, her face farouche from the kids' asylum where ice baths failed to tame her. Her claws are crescent moons sharpened on lightning. She swims through the star splinters of a mirror and emerges snarling, my were mama. She's a rainforest in a straitjacket. Where she leaps, the sky comes alive, unleashed from its bottle. My mother trying to conceal her lithium tremor as she carries the Amazon on her back, her rosettes of rivers and oxbow lakes, her clouds of chattering caciques, her flocks of archangels. Her own tongue is a hive that stings yet pollinates all the orchids of the forest. Her ears prick to the growl of roots under concrete, the purr of plants growing. My animal mother, shaman's bitch, a highway bulldozed through her brain. Shapeshifter into a trembling rabbit whenever I'm scared of her. She, who has had electric eels pressed to her scalp, can vanish into backwoods where no one can reach her. I'm trying to sew her back together, to make a patchwork of gold dust and ghost vines, a sylvan pelt of torn down trees, the shadow dance of leaves on litter. I'm trying to conjure her in her zoo cage as the doctor comes running to dart her.
That's great, and it's really interesting to hear that poem, Katie. It's a very interesting poem, to see on the page, and hear read, and the way she kind of makes her mother into this jaguar is quite extraordinary, I think.
Yeah, and then also using nature as a way of trying to get to the root, excuse the pun, of grief. And Mícheál used the word grief earlier on as well. And I think actually both collections that we're discussing this morning centre on grief in many ways, don't they? And loss. And they use nature to celebrate the world as well. So that was Katie Donovan in conversation with us about her new collection, May Swim, published by Blood X Books this year. And Mícheál McCann, he was talking about his book, Devotion. And I have to say, a collection like Katie's and Mícheál's, I think they're very much devoted to being alive. So that's another connection I thought I'd make. Mícheál's collection is published by Gallery Press and also published in May, wasn't it, of this year. So to both Katie and Mícheál, thanks a million for coming on the podcast this morning, joining us at the breakfast table. We might go and eat some toast and drink some coffee now, Peter, will we?
I think that's a good idea. I think it's an excellent idea. Yeah.
I think we've reached the end of our Books for Breakfast podcast this morning. I'm definitely rushing off to have more coffee. And I'm Enda Wiley, and I have Peter Sirr here with me. And Peter, would you like to tell everyone about the details of the podcast if they'd like to listen again?
Well, you can subscribe at all the usual sources, Google and Apple and so on. And if you want to check out the notes that go along with this podcast, you can go to booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. And so
we'll be back again. We'll have the toast on, we'll have the kettle boiling, we will have more books to discuss, and we're looking forward to having you here. So goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.